How many of you are loving this weather? It's pretty awesome, right? Just seeing if you're awake. You know, it's funny. I got to just correct something. You guys, knowing that I was raised in Michigan, I think you think Michigan's the Arctic. Because every time the weather gets a little bit cold, you guys are like, this is your weather, right? You guys love this weather. I'm like, you guys do realize Detroit's like 3 hours away. Does everyone understand that? It's not the North Pole. It's like 3 hours away. Yeah. Speaking of Michigan, my Detroit Lions are still in it. Come on now, guys. I am living my best life now. I won fantasy football this year. We know what happened with Michigan. My Lions are still in. It's awesome, man. I promise you I won't bring this up every week unless we win the Super Bowl. Then it's every week. All right. If you don't know, I was raised in Michigan, so that's why I root the way I do. Okay. Everyone good? All right. Grab a Bible, electronic device. Turn to Genesis chapter 25. We're going to be picking up in verse 29 in just a moment. We are in a series where we're evaluating the choices we make, and even specifically, we're helping create a system so that we can make the correct choices for life. Because it is estimated that the average person makes 35,000 choices a day. I mean, when you hear that number, it just seems so extreme. I think what you can recognize is if that number is accurate, not every choice has the same weight, but there are some choices that matter more than others. And one of the dynamics that we've acknowledged in this series is there's this tension that happens in every single one of our lives. On one hand, we all want to make choices that will make our lives better. That's normal, that's natural. And yet, every single one of us will experience at some point in our life, whether it's a moment or a day or a season, we will experience moments where we made destructive decisions that hurt us, that hurt our reputation, that hurt relationships, that hurt our finances, whatever it might be. And so there's that tension. We want to make the correct choices, but we don't always make the correct choices. And why is that? Well, the conviction that I have based on the scriptures is that the reason we make the incorrect choice is that we don't have a proper system in place to help us make the correct decisions. So we are spending 5 weeks evaluating this process with the hope that we'll give you a system that you can walk through to make the correct choices for your life. And what we're trying to do is give you simple phrases so that you can remember it. So the simple phrases we're giving is look up, look back, look down, look forward, open your eyes. And so 2 weeks ago, we began with look up. Any good decision is going to begin with inviting God into that choice. And so you do that through prayer, through His Word. If you weren't here, you can go back and watch that online for free. Last week, we looked at the idea of looking back before we look forward. Looking back is the idea of reflecting on God's faithfulness, that God was faithful before and He will be faithful again. His faithfulness is what gives us context to take steps of faith. And this week, we're going to look at the next topic. But before I address that, what I want to acknowledge is one of the things I'm sure you're kind of picking up on is all of the things that we're giving you, each one of them is prep work that goes into work before you make a decision. And the reason why this matters is I think one of the reasons why people make poor decisions in their life is because of a sense of urgency, and I would even say a false sense of urgency. It is urgency that oftentimes forces us to make decisions quickly that we normally wouldn't make. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but our culture is even trying to play on this. How many of you have noticed now when you get on Amazon or some type of online shopping that once you add something to your cart, it says only 2 or 3 left? Have anyone noticed this? I mean, I've noticed it across the board. I've noticed it on Amazon. I've noticed it on Nike. I've noticed it on American Eagle, any different places that I shop or shop for my kids. And here's what I just have to say. There's no way this is true. There's no way that's accurate, that these mega organizations that are shipping millions of items every single week, that they're down to their final 2 or 3 in each one of these categories. What are they doing? They're manipulating, because if they can get you to think that this great deal is going to fade or this item is going to sell out, that you're going to make an urgent decision and you'll do it quickly. And I know I've been manipulated by a sense of urgency before. I'm embarrassed to even say this. And as I start to tell you this story, I know you're going to laugh because you're going to see how foolish I was. But about 20 years ago, when Mary and I first moved to Lancaster, we bought our first house, a house that we absolutely loved. But when we bought the house, one of the things it needed was replace windows. And so we had a salesperson come out and pitched us the windows, and we weren't sure if we were going to buy them because it was a large amount of money. We would have had to take it out on credit in order to get the windows, and so we weren't really sure. So the person actually left, and then he came back. And when he came back, he said, "Listen, There's a special deal. I talked to my manager. I know, see, you're laughing because you know what I didn't know then, okay? So he goes, I talked to my manager, and here's what's going on. There's another construction thing going on around here that's going to be ordering some windows, and if we get you in on that order, then we can get your windows cheaper because they're already making the windows, but you have to make the decision today. And so Mary and I talked about it. It was cheaper. We're like, okay, we don't want to miss this deal. And so we agreed and we bought the windows. It wasn't until years later that I thought, wait a second. The whole sales pitch they gave us was that every single window is custom made to your house. So how could it be done at another construction site? What did they do? They manipulated me because of a sense of urgency. And the reason why I say that is all of the things that we're giving you, it requires us pausing. It requires us putting in the work in order to make correct decisions. And so this is my hope today, as we look at this, that we recognize that we need to slow down, that what God has given us in front of us, God has given us the tools necessary and given us what is required in order to make healthy decisions. And if we slow down and if we go through a system and if we go through the process God has given us, I'm really confident that we will make better decisions in our lives. And so today's phrase that I'm going to give you is also going to come with a question. And here's the phrase. Today we're going to look at the idea of to look down. And the question it comes with that I want you to ask yourself is, what will be the consequence if I make this choice? Now I just want to acknowledge something. The word consequence typically has a negative connotation in our minds, but it really is a neutral term. It could be good or bad. I'll be honest and say today I'm going to focus very much on the potential of making a wrong decision and use that as a framework to teach us. But I want us to also think about it in the positive. What's the effect? What's the result of the choices we make? What's the consequence if we make the right choice? What's the consequence if we make the wrong choice? And as obvious as this simple question is, this idea that in front of me is a choice. It's a step that I'm going to make. That if I will look down, again, this is all figurative, if I will look down at the step I'm about to make, what's this consequence? What's going to be the fallout from this? Now, this is a simple question. It's an obvious question, yet it's one, in my experience, I don't think we wrestle with enough. I think too often we make decisions without thought of the consequence. And here's why I know that's true in my life, and I'm confident it's true in your life. That we've all had a moment where we've made a bad decision and we've processed through it, and then we've said something along these lines to ourselves. If I would have known then what I know now, I would have never made that decision. How many of you have ever said a phrase similar to that in your life? I mean, look how many hands are up. Okay, here's a blunt pushback on that. I actually think we did know then. I actually think, and if you want to push back on that, I actually think we had all the necessary information that would be required to make a decision. So even now, when we look back on those moments, what we look back on and recognize is we had the information. We just didn't process it in the proper way. We didn't give that information enough weight or influence in our lives to make the correct decision. And this is the tension as we look back and for whatever reason, we looked at the information and we didn't process it in a healthy way. We thought we were the exception to the rule. We thought we were smarter. We thought we were more powerful. We thought that we somehow could ignore the information that we needed and still turn out okay, but we discovered that was false, only to our own hurt. And so what I want to show us today is the why behind that tension. That in every season, we will see the information. In some seasons, we will process it in a healthy way. In others, we won't. I want to look at one specific story. And through this story, I want to show us a tension that I think connects to all of us. And so if you haven't turned there, do so now to Genesis chapter 25. We're going to pick up in verse 29 in a moment. So I want to give you a little bit of background on this story. When God began his plan of redemption, so humanity had rejected him, he allowed humanity to experience the consequence of that. But when God began his plan of redemption, he created a nation for himself. This would play a major role in his plan. But in order to create a nation for himself, to do it in a proper way, a pure way, it always has to begin with one individual. So God called a man by the name of Abram. Initially, he changed his name to Abraham. And God made a promise to him. God said, through you, Abraham, is going to come an entire nation. and they're going to be so numerous that they will outnumber the sand on the beach, the stars in the sky. He even promised them that through your descendants, the entire world will be blessed. I mean, what a promise. And so Abraham had a son, Isaac, and Isaac actually had two sons. They were twin sons, but his oldest son was Esau. And so the line went Abraham, Isaac, Esau. But here's what I'm suspecting. There are many of you, maybe if you're raised in the church, you're familiar with that name, but there's many of you that might not recognize the name of Esau because it's not mentioned as much as his brother. Because more often than not, when we hear those names included in a group, we hear it this way. We hear the God of Abraham, Isaac, and who? Jacob. We hear a different name. We hear the name of the younger brother. Why is that? Well, there's many reasons. There's some deep theological elements to this. But in part, it's because Esau made a decision, the worst decision of his life, that ultimately changed everything. And so we're going to look at his story today. And Scripture tells us some oddly specific details about Esau and Jacob. Scripture tells us that Esau was a good hunter, and he was also super hairy and red. I don't know why it highlights that, but it is. He's a good hunter, he's super hairy, and he's red. And then his brother Jacob, it tells us, was a good cook and loved hanging out with his mom. So, random information, but that's what the Scripture tells us. Okay, you know all you need to know. Let's go into verse 29. It says, once, when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field. The assumption is he came in from hunting, spending days doing this. Esau came in from the field, and he was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted. So this one verse gives you a little bit of the background into why Esau made the worst decision of his life. And this decision that Esau is about to make not only impacts his life, but it ultimately impacts every single one of his descendants. Every person who would come from him would be impacted by this choice. I mean, literally, I cannot exaggerate this. I'm really not in any way. This decision changed the total trajectory of his life. Again, as I say this will feel like so weighted, you'll think I'm exaggerating. But it is possible this is recording one of the worst decisions ever made in human history. That's how dramatic it is. And the reason why I want you to understand the weight of it, the reason that Esau makes this decision is because he was physically hungry. Now, doesn't that seem bizarre what I just said? This most important decision, that's devastating decision, and he changed it he made a bad decision because he was physically hungry. I know how silly that sounds, but the simplicity of it is powerful. Because this right here explains why so many of us have made really bad decisions in our lives. And so today I'm going to give you 3 truths from this story. Here's the first one. Desire distorts truth. It was a moment of simple desire that caused him to make the worst decision of his life. And the truth of it is, I think we have experienced in some capacity in our life the power of desire. I remember years ago, about 22 years ago, I was still on staff in Detroit at my dad's church, and a good friend of mine who oversaw our men's ministry, but he was also one of my youth leaders at the time, he gave me this article, and I think he passed it out to the different people in the church too, but I just remember he gave me this article, and what I'm about to say, I just warn you, it's a little bit PG-13, but we are in the adult auditorium. But he gave me this article called The Zone. And what the article was about, and this is something that so impacted me, I have passed this information and this truth on for almost yearly when I talk about this specific topic with teens and with other young adults. But anyways, the point of the article was, it was written to people who had made a commitment in their life to honor God in purity and sexuality. And so it was written to couples that are dating and or engaged. And what it was talking about was there's this dynamic that happens. That in your life, when you're trying to honor God and you're just talking with your boyfriend, girlfriend, you can set all the standards in the world. You can say, this is what our boundaries will be. We won't go any further than this. It says, but what unfortunately happens is when you get into a moment, when you start to engage each other physically, kissing, making out, and what that leads to, all of a sudden, and this is what the article said, you enter into the zone. And in the zone, you don't think clearly. So before the zone, you can set all the standards. You're thinking absolute clarity. After the zone, you can look back with regret and clarity and say, oh, I wish I wouldn't have done that. And, that broke our standards. But when you're in the zone, once desire has kicked in, desire becomes a distorter of how you're processing former commitments and the standards that you've set for your life. And that's very true in the context of physicality and romance and things like that. But I think we also recognize that same truth applies to many other areas of our lives. That when we get into a moment of desire, it can distort what was once a standard that we had. I'll give you a few examples. And again, these are rhetorical, so you don't need to raise your hand to these, okay? But how many of us have, before we went to the dealership, the car dealership, had set a standard of what our monthly payment can be? And then you go into the dealership, and you touch the leather, right? And all of a sudden now you're like, whoa, honey, come here. Smell that. Smell the leather. Do you smell that? I mean, I remember I had a feature in a previous vehicle of mine. So I had heard of heated seats, which I think is the coolest thing in the world. In a previous vehicle, I had air-conditioned seats. Have you ever had that? Game changer, right? Like it's something that my next vehicle, I promise you, I will have that. But what happens is you get in there and you set a budget in your mind. And all of a sudden the desire begins to kick in and you start to rationalize it. And then you find yourself leaving with a higher payment, right? Same thing happens in house shopping. I remember, 20 years ago when we moved here, we bought our first house. In Detroit, we were renters, Mary and me. So we bought our first house. We moved to town. I didn't even have a concept of a budget, neither one of us, in the sense of for a house. Like, we didn't know what we could afford. We just kind of picked a number out of a hat. But we were like, we're looking, our range, again, this is 20 years ago, we're like the $100,000 range. That's what we told them. So the first few houses they showed us just didn't meet our standard of quality of life. The very first house they showed us did not have a shower. It had only a bath. And I'm like, I am a grown man. I am not taking a bath every single day, with rubber ducky. Like, that felt weird. So I was like, no to that. And so they kept showing us house, and I was like, it wasn't meeting our standards. So after we'd done this for a week or two, my brother-in-law, Keith, his mother, who Mary and I were living with until we found a house, Mrs. Kumler, drove me around to show me the area. She was kind of giving me like the information. She, had lived here for a long time. This is a nice area to live. This is a nice street. So she took me to the street. And when we went down there were two houses for sale. And she had told me, this street's a wonderful street. So we went on it, and there was two houses next to each other for sale. And we noticed that one of them for sale was actually vacant, that whoever was selling it wasn't actually living there. So it allowed us to go up to the door. It was a glass door. I looked in. And when I looked in, wood floors, beautiful. I mean, just all the trim work. It was gorgeous, exactly what I wanted. It was also 25% more than the budget we had set. It was $125,000. It didn't matter. That was the house we bought. But once I saw it and I showed Mary it, and that desire kicks in, like, yes, this has everything we want, all of a sudden we rationalized it. You guys know what I'm saying, right? This happens in so many areas of our lives. You want to go on vacation, but then you start to look at the options and desire kicks in. I mean, how many of us were like, I want to eat healthy, but the desire to eat good food kicks in. See what I did there, right? Food that tastes good, you know what I mean? Like, it kicks in, or you go, you know what? I want to wake up early and I want to begin to work out. And then you're like, but there's sleep, and like the desire, right? And this happens in dating relationships. Like, you can set a standard. This is all that I want in the future boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife. But then if you have that desire because you're lonely to feel connection, people will lower the standards. People will do the same thing with their kids. That their kids will want this activity or that activity. And they might set it as a desire. I want them to know God and to be raised in the church. But yet there's also this desire. I don't want my kids to miss out on anything. And so at times people say yes to things and pulls their kids out of church. I mean, this is the tension of desire. Desire distorts truth. And when you allow your desire to be the lens to process truth, desire will distort it. And let's all agree, as Esau faced this dilemma, can we all agree the stew in front of him, the soup in front of him, was an illusion? What he thought this would provide for him wasn't actually what it would provide. The same thing in our lives. Our desires are oftentimes illusions. Are you guys tracking with me? This is the tension of it. Okay, so let's go further in verse 31. So Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright now." This is the deal that his kind brother wants to make with him. Sell me your birthright. Esau said, I am about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me? So I just want to pause in this moment. Jacob is deceiving his brother. And do you know the irony of it? Jacob's name, actually a part of it means deceiver, supplanter. It's this idea. Just as a rule of thumb, don't name your kid deceiver. You know what? As I said that joke in the first service, someone came to me and goes, I named my kid Jacob. I'm like, let's be clear. You named your kid Jacob. If you named your kid deceiver, that's weird, okay? So back then, she actually used the term in their language. Okay, you get what I'm saying. All right. But Jacob is trying to deceive. He's trying to take advantage of his brother's weak moment. And the truth of it is, this happens in our lives. That desire gets exploited in our lives. But I want to take a moment and I want to set the table, pun intended, okay? He's about to serve him stew. But I want you to think about it. Esau is hungry. Jacob's willing to trade a bowl of stew for Esau's birthright. But let's just pause. Because birthrights don't have the same weight in the Western culture that they would in this culture, especially all those years ago. So what does this mean? Esau was the oldest son. And so with that, being in that position, he would have held a position of privilege and special honor within the family. He would have been given more responsibility, more authority. When the father passed away, he would step in now as the patriarch of the family. On top of that, the oldest son would get a double portion of what any other child would get. So in this case, if there's two brothers, then they would split it into three. Esau would get 2 portions, and Jacob would get 1 portion. On top of this, in the specifics of this family, his father, Isaac, was being supernaturally blessed by God. God called Abraham and told him, I'm going to bless you. So Abraham was supernaturally blessed. That blessing was being passed down to Isaac. It was very clear. He would have communicated that to his family. So in order to get the blessing from his father, it wasn't just an ordinary blessing. He was receiving the supernatural blessing of God. And on top of that, if this all went as it looked like it should go, he would be the one who continues the promised seed of Abraham, of God's plan of restoration. Again, on the surface, this is what all that he was weighing in this choice that his brother Jacob gave him. So his brother Jacob goes, I will take that for a bowl of stew. I mean, as we look at that, can we all agree that a right-thinking person would not take that deal? Would you all agree? Right? Esau took the deal. Esau looked at that and said, I want that. Here's the second truth. Distorted truth makes one foolish. Desire distorts the truth, and the distortion causes us to make bad decisions. I mean, what did Esau say? I'm about to die. You're like, bro, eat a Snickers and man up. You're not about to die. But that's what he felt. That was the manipulation going on. He wanted this need, this desire that he had, his immediate desire for food, he wanted it so bad that he quit thinking about the value of what he was about to give up. I don't want anyone to miss this. You need to think about this for a minute. Desire causes us to lose sight of the true cost. Here's what desire often does. Desire elevates the temporary while devaluing what's really important. I want to say that again. Desire elevates the value, the temporary of the temporary, and devalues what's really important in our lives. And so in this moment, Esau is not doing a proper cost analysis. He's not looking at this saying, like, is it worth it to give up everything that's going to bless me from this point forward for a momentary fix of my hunger need, of just eating a bowl of stew? And so he agrees to it. And in verse 33, Jacob said, swear to me now. So Esau, swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew. And he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. And the literal meaning of the word despise is to undervalue. He undervalued his birthright. Here's the third truth. Lives can be destroyed in a moment of foolishness. Esau destroyed his life and his descendants. And if you think about it, lentil soup, lentil stew, lentils are common, right? Readily available. But what's not common, what's not readily available is his birthright. He gave up something that was unique and special, a privilege to himself, He gave up this blessing of God for something that was common, something that would satisfy for a moment and then be gone. And he didn't do the true cost analysis. And I think this is the tension we have in our lives as we face different choices, relational choices, who to date, which obviously can lead to marriage. So who to marry, what jobs to take, how it's going to impact. Does it take me away from my family? Does it take me away from my calling in my life? Does it take me away from church? The financial decisions that we make, is it going to put me in a place that creates stress? Is it going to hinder me from being able to obey God in my finances? All the different major choices that we face, all the small choices that we face, they all have the potential for us in desire to miss the truth of what God is trying to reveal. So here's the question that this is about. So how do we avoid this? How do we create a system around ourselves so that we can avoid making decisions that not only will destroy our lives, but to destroy the lives of people that matter to us, that we love, that we're responsible for? Well, what I'm going to tell you is it's going to be simple in some ways, but it's going to be really difficult to do. You have to ask and answer some really tough questions. And so that's what I want to do now. In my remaining time, I want to give you some tough questions to ask as you wrestle through this. And I want to be clear. I want you to view each of these questions through the positive and the negative. I will naturally focus on the negative, but if I make the correct decision, what does it mean? If I make the incorrect decision, what does it mean? And I would love for you to make this personal. If there's some major decision that you're facing, think about that as you think about these questions. Here's the first one that we've already given you that we began with today. What will the consequence be if I make this choice? But I want to go even deeper with this question. What are the physical, relational, mental, emotional, financial, and spiritual consequences of making this choice? I think just too often, if I'm being blunt, too often we don't weigh all the different ways that choices we make can impact our lives and the people around us. One of the worst decisions that I've ever made in my marriage was years ago, and I've shared this before, but I bought a motorcycle. And I bought a motorcycle in a season where, truthfully, we couldn't afford it. I desired it. I wanted it. My friend had a motorcycle much like it, and I loved driving it. And so I just got so singularly focused that I ended up buying a motorcycle. I didn't really heed good, wise advice that was given to me. I just focused my mind on it. And I still remember the day that I logically made sense of it. I bought the motorcycle. I brought it home. And I knew there was an embarrassment about it because I knew my wife wasn't thrilled, but I almost wanted her to be happy. And when her body language was being kind, trying to act happy for me, but I could tell she wasn't happy, and I could tell it created insecurity. It lost its luster almost immediately for me. And what I didn't weigh then that I would weigh now in maturity is I did not consider how that choice would impact us relationally, mentally, emotionally, and even spiritually. I didn't take into account the betrayal of trust that Mary felt. I did not take into account the insecurity that I put into her mind and heart that she would now stress about our finances. And I had logically rationalized it. I was like, if I could get a real small side job, because it wasn't a huge monthly payment, if I get a side job and I just do that one day a week, then I'll be able to make the payment. Do you know how many weeks I did the side job? 2 weeks. And so I felt that tension. I felt the tension later on of just knowing that as a husband, I was called to love my wife the same way that Christ loved the church, to basically create an environment for her where she felt secure, she felt loved, and I didn't do that. So there was a financial cost, but there was an emotional cost, there was a mental cost, there was a relational cost, there was a spiritual cost. And I look back now with total regret and embarrassment about that. But if I would have just processed the information that was so clearly there when I was making that decision and done it in a healthy way, I would have never chosen to buy that motorcycle. And so the next sub-question of this is, what is the typical consequence of making this choice? What's typical? Because you're not the exception. Some time ago, a year, 2, 3 years ago, I did a series called Naive. One of my favorite series that I've done. But in the opening week, the first message of that series was titled, "You are not the exception, you are the rule." Because what we typically buy into is this mindset, oh, I'm the exception. I'm going to be smarter. I'm going to be different. I'm going to be more powerful. And so the consequences that normally happen won't happen to me. But that's foolishness, my friends. Because there's this famous proverb, one of my favorite ones, in Proverbs 22:3 says, the prudent or the wise sees danger and hides himself, but the simple go on and suffer for it. I mean, what it's describing is the wise person looks up because they see what is typical. They see what normally happens. They see the danger, and instead of running toward the danger, they go and they hide. They protect themselves. It is the simple or the fool who looks at what everyone else sees, looks at the common result, and just goes, right down the pathway toward destruction. And so we have to ask ourselves, are we willing to wrestle with this tension? Are we willing to look at it and say, what's the normal? What's the typical? Because friends, when you think about it, if you are making a decision hoping that in every way the best case scenario happens, that almost never actually does, right? If you're making a decision and you're thinking, I'm making this decision and best case is no one ever finds out about it, so I'm making this secret choice, no one will ever find out. That's rarely the case. Information gets out. If you're making a choice financially and it's based on money you don't yet have, you think, oh, every year I get a cost of living raise, every year I get a bonus, I'm going to get this promotion. And so you are spending money you don't yet have. You're banking on the best case happening. But what happens if you don't get that promotion? What happens if you don't get that cost of living raise? What happens if the economy slows down? What happens if they cut back your hours? What happens if you lose your job? Because what's typical in life is the water heater goes out. What's typical is you drive over a nail and you have to get a new tire. What's typical is the unexpected happens. And so if you will pause and say, what's the consequence? What's the fallout? What's the typical? You will put yourself in a better position. Another proverb that I love that's absolutely disgusting, but I love it, is Proverbs 26:11. Like a dog that returns to his vomit is a fool who repeats his folly. In case you don't understand it, let me paint you a word picture here. What it's talking about is a dog eats something, his body doesn't agree with it, he throws it up, and then he eats it again. He's like, let's try that again. I know it didn't work the first time, but let's try it again. Maybe this time will be better. And it's saying that's what it's like for a person who keeps repeating the same mistakes, that looks at the typical, that looks at the normal and goes, this time will be different. It's as illogical and gross as a dog vomiting up and then saying, let's try this again. But you know what? I want to take this scripture and I'm going to do something I absolutely do not recommend, okay? I'm going to do something. I'm going to add to scripture. Again, hear me on this. This is just my opinion, okay? I'm just adding something that I think is a good part of this. It's not on the same level as the Bible. Let's just be clear. So this is Proverbs 26:11. I'm about to show you Matthew Johnson 26:11, okay? I would tweak this scripture, and this is how I would word it. Like a dog that returns to his vomit is a fool who repeats someone else's folly. What I mean by that, years ago I had advice from my dad's friend, and he said, you've heard it like, wise people learn from experience. He goes, only fools learn from experience. You should learn from other people's experiences. You should be able to look at other people's lives and what works and what doesn't. And so you don't have to go through the pain of suffering what they suffered by learning from their experience. So this is just my opinion, but I am confident Solomon would agree with me, who wrote it. But in this, I just think true evaluation is to go, what has been my past experience, but what's the experience of others? How are other people who have made this decision, how has it impacted their lives? Let's go on. Here's another question you can wrestle with. Where can I get wise counsel on this? So who is it that you can go to that's going to give you good advice? Now, I'm going to confess something, and I asked my wife's permission to do this, and she said I could. So what I'm going to tell you, I do so with her opinion. My wife is the most practical person you will ever meet. In 20 plus years of marriage, this is without exaggeration, my wife has never made an emotional purchase, which is infuriating to me because I love a good emotional purchase. You know what I mean? I love looking at something and it's illogical, but I like it and I want to buy it. And so, I love those moments. I love the joy it brings me. I want to celebrate it. How many of you are like me? Be honest. Okay. All right. Out of own curiosity, how many of you are like Mary? We need you, but you drive us crazy. All of you people, okay? So Mary, she just does not make emotional decisions, which means there is frequently times in our marriage that we are frustrated with each other. Mary is the one, when we go to the car dealership, Mary is the one who asks questions like, do we need the upgrade? Like, what kind of question is that? Do we need the leather? I'm like, did you touch it? Did you smell it? Do you need cool seats? Yes. Have you sat on them and how it makes your bottom feel, right? So Mary's that person. And I have to be honest. I'm using humor, but on the serious side of it, it creates tension with us. It creates frustration because she's so practical, it's so wise, and yet it's so needed. And what I've learned in our marriage is that as much as it bothers me, as much as it can create tension, that I've had to learn to respect it. I've had to learn to go to Mary because when I ask the questions that are natural to Mary, because she's able to disconnect emotion. She's able to disconnect desire. And so she's asking the questions that need to be asked. And when I listen to Mary, we make better financial decisions. When we listen to me, we have a lot more fun. But you know what I'm saying. But who can you go to get wise counsel? If you're a child, do you go to your parents to ask them their advice? It's one of the things that I've enjoyed as my children have aged, and this sounds really self-serving, but as they've gotten older, my kids have started to value more and more the advice that Mary and I can give them because we've gone through similar situations. I want to encourage you, students, teens, children, go to your parents, ask them advice because they know, because they've experienced what you're going through. Do you have wise friends you can ask? And I want to encourage you, don't post it on Facebook and expect if someone likes it that they're agreeing with you because people agree with a lot of stupid things. They really do. So get wise friends. You go to your pastor, go to a connect group leader. Is there someone you're hiding information from because you know if they find out they'll give you a different view and you don't want the different view? If you feel that tension, go to that person because those are the things needed to protect you. Here's the next question. If this decision was public, what would the response be? And I don't mean necessarily like social media public as much as just it was out there for family and friends. Because here's what I know. I'll make a confession. I have total clarity on other people's stupidity. Anyone else? And I am confident that other people have total clarity on my stupidity. So there's just safety in just bringing it up. Like I am really, really blessed to be in an environment with mature, godly people that I work with, the staff. I really mean that genuinely. I like to be able to talk to them. I like to be able to get their opinion, to just kind of put it out there on different decisions that I'm facing in my life and with the ministry. But are you doing that? Because here's what I've learned, that so many wrong choices happen in a bubble of our own making, that we try to just shield the information from getting out, and we choose not to take in the information that's needed. So who and how would people respond? Do you have wise people in your life? Here's the next question. Do I have all the information needed to make a wise choice? I'm going to give you some advice here. If you are trying to lose weight, I have the fail-proof solution. It requires a digital scale, the one that has like the digital reading and shows you the pounds. So like mine, how it is in my house, so if you're trying to lose weight, this is like my strategy, okay? In my house, when I step on the scale, it immediately goes basically to the weight where it's going to settle, but it spends the last few seconds like zero in on the exact amount that I weigh. So like it would go to like within 1 or 2 pounds, and then it would kind of go back and forth, and then I'll see the tenths of the pounds change, and then it gives you the number. And then once it gives you that number, it locks it in, and it just holds it there. You guys know what I'm talking about? Here's what I've learned, though. When I step on it, almost immediately, I can basically tell where it's going to end. And so if it means I'm going to gain weight, I just step off the scale. It zeroes out. I've never gained weight because of that. I'm telling you, you can try it. It'll change your life, okay? Now, how many of you get that what I'm saying is nonsense, right? Because all I've done is chosen not to take in new information. But not taking in new information does not change what's actually taking place. When you are making decisions, do you have all the necessary information to make a wise choice? I'm going to give you a couple that if you don't, there's a lot of weight to this. If you don't have a budget and you're making major financial choices, you don't have enough information to make that wise choice. If you don't know what God has to say about the major choices of your life, you don't have enough information yet to make a wise choice. If you don't know how this is going to impact, if you haven't had a conversation, you haven't done research, you don't have enough information. So like I said in the beginning, I realize this is not quick, but this is a process, but there's health to this, there's maturity to this, there's wisdom to this. And the final question, I saved to last, not because it's least important, just the opposite, it's the most important, is what does God say will be the consequence of this decision? See, here's what I'm confident about. I had someone after the first service talk to me about a choice that they were facing in their life, and I was able to share this with them. I am 100% confident that our God is kind. And our kind God, as a loving Father, will help direct us in our lives if we open ourselves up to his instruction. And I'm so confident in his kindness that I know that when God puts a check in my spirit, where he just makes me uneasy about a choice I'm about to make, that is a loving Father trying to stop me. And I'm also really confident that God in his kindness, that when I ask his opinion, he'll make it clear. He'll give me direction. He'll provide information that I need, that he'll give me a peace about what path he wants me to go down. But how do we respond to the check? How do we respond to God's calling in our life? Do we choose to obey or do we choose to disobey? Because, I'll just be blunt with you. Ignoring God's instruction in your life is the very definition of foolishness. You will not it is impossible to make a wise decision in opposition to what God has spoken to you. But to trust God, as illogical as it seems to the world, to trust God in whatever it is he's called you to do is the very definition of wisdom. God is guiding you. So what is God saying to you? Have you paused to ask God's instruction for your life? Years ago, and this is what I want to close with. Years ago, God gave me a prophetic dream. I am very confident that God speaks to us. That is very much a foundation of my relationship with him. But I can honestly say this is only one or two times that I felt like I had a very clear dream. So I've received visions from God, words from God, things like that. But this is the only time I can think about in a dream. And the week leading up to this dream, some major negative things happened to people that I knew of or was familiar with. The first one was there was a worship pastor that was my favorite worship leader. And he was nationally known, really on the rise. His songs were the top of the charts, loved his stuff. And it came out that he was having a multiple-year affair with one of his best friend's wives. And it was just devastating when I heard that. And just knowing that it was going to impact his life, his ministry. And truthfully, he never recovered. He never received the same influence that he once had. So that happened in this 1 week. That very same week, I was talking to a friend from college, and they told me that a pastor at the church I went to in college, it just came out that he had an affair and was frequently prostitutes. Very dramatic behavior. And I was just devastated by that. To just hear that this pastor had surrendered his calling in his life and devastated his family. The very same week, there was a college coach in football that it came out that his players had done unethical things. He knew about it, and he was like the standard of character and ethics, but he knew about their behavior, and so he lost his job. So all this happened in the same week. And so it was just set a weird mood for the week. And I just remember thinking about it and kind of wrestling with it. There was like a soberness to it. And so it's one night I had this dream, and in the dream, I was walking, and it was as far as I could see in any direction. I was walking about knee-high in what was like fog or clouds, almost like a caricature of heaven, where we'd walk on clouds. But all of the clouds were just brightly illuminated white, like they were underlit. So it was just as far as I could see clouds, and I was just walking in them. And for some reason, I was walking, and I don't know why, but I just knew that in front of me, I was coming to some steps. And so I couldn't see because of the cloud, the fog. And so I came up to the edge, and I did one of these, like to find the step, and I couldn't find it. So I got a little closer, and I went down. I couldn't find it. Then I switched foot, and I went down a little bit lower, and I couldn't find it. So I was like, I'll just get down. So I got down, and I sat, and I scooted to the edge, and I went like this with my feet, and I was trying to find the step, and I couldn't. And the moment I sat here like this, all of the fog dissipated, and it went away, and I looked, and I realized I was hundreds of feet in the air. And there was no step in front of me. And that if I would have taken this step, I would have died. And I just remember God said to me, there will be choices you face where the wrong step can destroy your life. And it was sobering. I woke up right away from the dream, and I knew what God was speaking to me. God wasn't saying that I was literally physically die. He was saying that there could be choices that I could make that could destroy my marriage. There could be choices that I'll face that could destroy my family. And now all these years later, and I don't say this with any type of ego, I realize now that if I make certain choices, I can destroy thousands of lives and the impact that I could have. And I just remember that was a moment in my life, but from there, God radically changed my perspective. That I just came from there and I went, you know what? I don't want to be one of those people that destroy other people's lives. I want to live a life of integrity. I want to live a life that reflects God's values to the world. I want to end well. It's the passion of my life. It's the passion of my ministry. And so I have been extremely purposed in my life to create barriers around me so that I don't make choices that will damage. I have things around my life that protect my marriage. I do not allow other women to have influence in my life. I'm very, very careful about that. I'm very careful about the financial decisions that I make. I have oversight in my life. I don't have any secrets from my wife. The choices that I made, my wife has access to every single device that I own. She knows every single password. I don't have lost time. My wife always knows where I'm at. And I want to be clear, I've never once cheated on my wife or been tempted to cheat on my wife. My wife always knows where I'm at. When I get into my vehicle before I leave work, I call her. If I'm going anywhere, I call her. She always knows. Why? Because I just made decisions years ago. I'm not going to make a choice that's going to bring death to my life. I'm not going to make a choice that's going to hurt Mary. I'm not going to make a choice that's going to hurt my children. I'm not going to make choices that's going to hurt the church. But it comes through a conscious decision, and this is what God wants for us. Will you take a moment and bow your heads? I want you to think about whatever choices you're facing in your life. And right now, I want you just to surrender that choice to God. God, I'm so thankful that you care about our choices because you care about our lives. You genuinely want us to experience life at its best. And you care not only for us, you care about our marriages, you care about our friendships, you care about our families, our jobs, our churches, our calling. And so I pray that every person here that is facing a major choice, or even a small choice, whatever it might be, I pray that today they will slow down and walk through the process of inviting you into the choice. I pray that they will slow down and ask the tough questions. I pray they will seek out godly advice and wisdom. And I pray that your Spirit will guide them to make the correct choice. Help us all to trust you. And we know that through that, you will bring blessing in our lives because you are a good God and you're kind. And we pray this in your precious name. Amen.